Mechanic Petra Jones. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Periscope. Wonder whether everyone can hear me. How's it going, guys? I just finished recording. Hey man, what's up? I just finished recording. Thanks. An episode with Michaela, which is going to go live today, I hope. Muscle Mechanic, welcome. How are you doing? Shouldn't you be on your way here? Maybe? I don't know. Oh, you are on your way to see me. Good. Tone 1 PT. Waiting for an Uber. Cool. Ladies and Petra Jones, one of the speakers at We Are Podcast. Petra, how's it going? You've been kicking some really good goals with the Mompreneur Show. Congratulations on that. Stop it. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'm gonna be talking about how I got to 1.2 million downloads, and it's a bit weird for me to talk about it because I have to say Michaela forced me to do it. She actually seriously twisted my arm and said, "Ronsley, you have to do this Periscope so we can repurpose the video. We can use it in other spaces, and you got to talk about what you did or your learnings on how you got to 1.2 million downloads." And first of all, I'm pretty psyched that we got to 1.2. Thanks, Petra. Yeah, it's something that I don't pay attention to as much, the stats, and I feel like a lot of the podcasters in general we do pay attention to our stats because I suppose it's one way of measuring what we can do, what we've achieved, and it probably is one way of measuring our quote unquote success. And I don't think that's true. I think there's so many other ways to measure success. And while it's great to have a whole bunch of listeners, it doesn't matter whether you have 10 listeners or you have 100,000 listeners. I think the more important part is how engaged are those listeners. You could have, in my case, 1.2 million listeners, but if there's no engagement, there's no point. So just talk to the people that you know you're trying to help. I think that's really, really important. So I did a quick mind map of what I thought were the 7 steps well, not 7 steps, but 7 things that I took into consideration when I started my podcast, because I think a lot of people are starting podcasts today, and I get all these questions. Like, for example, yesterday I had a whole bunch of questions from people saying, "I've got all this audio that I've recorded, and I'm just going to put that on iTunes." And I want to clarify that is not a podcast. That is a bunch of audio that lives somewhere. And we kind of need to be really careful that a podcast is a continual series of audio that when someone listens to one episode, they understand what you're about, they understand why you're doing what you're doing, and when they come back, they understand the promise of your show, where people can expect a similar sort of episode the next time around. So that's when they'll subscribe. If it's kind of just a bunch of audio files, there is no series. Think about your favorite TV shows. Like, if you think of your favorite TV shows, if there was no continuity to it, would you tune in? I find it very hard to believe. So a podcast is very similar, it's just an audio format. So make sure, this is for me, number one, and it's always been this case for me, that I think we don't pay attention to it as much. Somehow we think that we should get the best mic. Somehow we think we should get the best guests on the show. Like, for example, the other day I had someone say, "I'm going to start a podcast because I know this big entrepreneur, and I'm going to get him to talk I'm gonna go and interview him. And that's not why you create the show. I mean, first find out why you're creating the show, and then see who you know that you can get on your show. So I think we started backwards. So the first thing that you're going to do when you start a podcast is make sure that you have a concept that is absolutely clear, like why you're creating the show, how does it appeal to you, how does it appeal to the people that would listen to the show, why would they want to listen, what kind of information are you giving them, is it something that they're going to get a chance to implement, is it something that they're going to get a chance to listen to and engage with, is it going to be a storytelling type of show. What is the case? I will get to SoundCloud. I'll make a note of that. But I have thoughts on SoundCloud. Bear with me. So where I was going with that is finding out why you're doing the show. How does it connect with who you are as a person? Why? Because at the end of the day, if you just create a show around something you don't like, it's going to come through. You're only going to be able to hide that for so long. So create a show around something that speaks to your insides. And again, your ideal listeners don't necessarily have to be your ideal clients. They're not most of the time. So you got to make sure that you know that distinction. That's why your concept clarification is so important. Find out who you're talking to, why you're talking to them. Find out why you're doing it, find out how that fits into your business or your brand or the reasoning behind creating the podcast. Determine your success levels. Like what does the success look for you? Don't let the numbers dictate success, because then you start comparing yourself to the people that have millions and thousands and hundreds of thousands of downloads, and it's not realistic. Like, everyone has different circumstances that have gotten them to that point, but determine why you're creating the podcast. And if you're creating a podcast to build influence, then find out how many conversations you can have. That determines success. So as an example, if you want to be known as the real estate agent that is, that is really cool and cutting edge within the home scene, and you want to kind of determine success by how many people you help. So how many people get a better idea of about real estate as a result of your show. So determine your success. So that's number one, your concept clarification. Always, if you hear me talk anytime, that's always the number one thing that I think you should do. If you don't develop your concept, everything from this point onwards is like swimming upstream, like running a marathon with a backpack on. It's not worth it. Don't do it. Number two, establish your brand. So once you have your concept, you know who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, what the reasoning behind creating the platform is, then you can go ahead and then start designing stuff like the logos, pictures and themes and colors and all that kind of jazz. There's no point doing that first and then saying, oh yeah, now I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and talk to first home owners as an example. It doesn't make sense. So you first figure out what you want to do, and then you go ahead and create a brand around it. So when you're creating your brand, your logo design, your colors that you use are very relative to the kind of people you're going to talk to. What kind of social media accounts you're going to create, what kind of name, how you're going to name your podcast, that becomes relevant. But again, that doesn't help if you don't know what your concept is. So and then sort of figuring out what the concept of your show is with your intros and your outros. So this is the branding comes around how people will interpret your podcast based on the kind of information that you give them. So intros and outros, graphics, themes, colors, words that you use all become relevant past that concept clarification point. Number three, setting up systems. So this is what I'll talk about SoundCloud for a second, but I think, so after you clarify your concept and then you build your brand, you then can look at the systems. And a lot of people have a lot of these issues around systems. Like, sometimes it's the first questions they ask, like, Ronsley, what kind of mic should I buy? And that's not, don't worry about your mic. Like, fuck, there are so much options out there. It shouldn't be your first the first thing you should worry about. But setting up your systems, you look at your hardware. When it comes to hardware, your mic, don't go out and buy the most expensive mic. You don't need the most expensive mic. Make sure you have an XLR mic. In my opinion, again, this is my opinion, an XLR mic that connects into a mixer so that you can split the channels when you talk to someone, so you can remove noise from each other's channel. I think that's important. So hardware systems is your next point of call with your systems. Then is software systems, and that goes that's about like Skype, how you're going to connect with people, Libsyn account, where you're going to store your MP3 once it's recorded, and SoundCloud comes into this conversation. Now, I actually have a SoundCloud account, but I don't use it because it doesn't give me the stats that Libsyn gives me. And that's the reason why I don't use SoundCloud or haven't hosted on SoundCloud. I have posted a few things on SoundCloud. In fact, I've got a pro account with SoundCloud, but both my podcasts are hosted on Libsyn. We will be moving one of them over to Audioboom because they've come on as a sponsor for We Are Podcast. And if you didn't know that, go check them out at audioboom.com. They've got Russell Brand and all these big time players as part of their the podcast that they host, and they're the only ones that can host, distribute, and monetize someone's podcast. So if you guys are getting involved in it, I think you should check Audioboom out. But yeah, SoundCloud, they're great, but I think you really want to know statistics, like as much as you should not follow them and not be totally consumed by the statistics. Having them in their back pocket is really amazing. So I don't think I would know. So this is the problem. So if you host on SoundCloud as an example, and then you tell iTunes that, hey, I have this podcast on SoundCloud, and someone listens to your podcast on iTunes, then SoundCloud doesn't actually record that as a listen, which means you could have a whole bunch of people listening to your podcast on iTunes, but SoundCloud is not recording that as a listen. So that's what happens to someone like Flying Solo as an example. They host on SoundCloud. So Flying Solo, I want to say .com or .com.au, Google them, but they host on SoundCloud, and they don't see the actual numbers because there could be a whole bunch of people listening to them on a different platform, but SoundCloud doesn't record those as numbers. It's only if you listen to SoundCloud, the actual audio file on SoundCloud is when it records it as a listen. So those are my thoughts. I hope that helps about SoundCloud. The next step is figuring out, based on your concept, based on your brand, you start figuring out what the structure of your recording should be. Like you gotta like, why are you creating it? Is it going to be a solo show? It's going to be an interview show. I'm very biased towards interview shows because I love talking to people. This is really weird. Like a one-way thing is really weird for me. In fact, it took me, I don't know, maybe 40 odd episodes to do my first solo show. And even that was pretty rubbish. I'd rather have conversations. So I'm very biased towards interview. I love talking. Yes, I do. But figure out in this part, like in the fourth bit that I think that you should do is figuring out the structure of your show. What kinds of questions you're going to ask? What kind of emotion are you going to drive out? If you're going to have an interview type show, if it's a solo show, what kind of information you're going to give? How you're going to keep them engaged for that long, and all that kind of jazz. So you first clarify your concept, make sure your concept is clear. Then you establish your brand based on the concept. Then you set up your systems, so hardware and software systems. Then you structure your show depending on your concept and your brand and who you want to reach and what your view on the whole matter is. And then you start arranging your recordings. Absolutely, man. Fuck, talking to a screen is hard. And the fact that I can't see any of you guys, it's just even weirder. But thank you for the few messages that come up in the hearts that you guys send, because that really helps my brain go, hey, there's someone listening. So step 5, arranging your recording. So once you have your recording in as an MP3 file. Once you have that happening, then what do you do from that point onwards? Like, you got to remove your background noise, and you got to add an intro and outro, and you got to export that to MP3, and then from that point you got to host it, and then you got to create a blog post, and you got to do all these things, and there is little steps. So what I suggest everyone does is, after you figure the first 4 steps out, and you get to arranging your recordings, what I suggest you do, sorry, I missed that YouTube question. Can you just post that again? I totally missed that. I saw it and I totally missed it. The step 5 in arranging your recordings, make sure you make a checklist of how to do it one step at a time. I do have a visual flowchart that we can use, and there is like a bunch of steps, that a 45-item checklist that you can get from We Are Podcast, so that you know. YouTube is the same way. You can't see your audience. Yes, I know, and I think that's the issue with video. It is the issue with audio as well, but I kind of overcome that by interviewing someone. So there's actually some sort of two-way conversation happening. Yeah, cool. Happy to send that out. So, but step 5 is all about arranging your recordings, making sure that each of the steps are done, making a list, making a checklist, making a framework to make sure that every time you do it going forward, that you're doing it in the same way. It's all relevant. You're not missing a few steps, and it all comes out the same. Would you recommend using YouTube for podcasts? No, I wouldn't recommend using YouTube for podcasts, because YouTube is it's a video, as an example. It takes, like, for me, this is a long video for someone to watch, and I hope that the fact that they're watching it is giving them enough information for them to do something with it. Now, when you look at videos, even in your Facebook feed, you're only going to watch a video that's 1-2 minutes at the most. Sometimes in 30 seconds we kind of disconnect from the video, and we don't want to watch it. So it's too long to put it on YouTube. A podcast is more detailed, and it's more created in a way that someone that is consuming that content can do it while doing other things. So I wouldn't suggest YouTube. Step 6. This is the bit that's fun. There is a saying in podcasting that is, if you spend 20% of your time creating the content, you've got to spend 80% of your time promoting it. So in this step, it's all about social media, how to leverage the content that you've created. Does audiobook count iTunes downloads like Libsyn? Does audiobook count iTunes downloads like Libsyn? I don't know what audiobook is, dude. I'm not sure what that is. I don't know whether it's another platform or whether you're talking about audible.com. Audioboom. Sorry, dude. I don't know enough yet about Audioboom, about the platform. We're moving Podcast Revolution over, and I will know more about the back end stats. But I will answer that question as soon as we are moved over, so that I know exactly what the back end looks like. But great question. So step 6 is all about creating social media awareness. Use Facebook, depending on where your people are. LinkedIn, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram is growing rapidly. Google Plus, not so much anymore. But email, how do you leverage your guest? Like, your guest becomes your ally. Like, you've spoken to them for half an hour, 40 minutes, sometimes an hour. They kind of know who you are. They're not going to forget who you are. So how do you leverage that? How do you leverage your email list? How do you let people know? How you get them to engage? And how do you promote it and market this content that you've taken so much time to create? You've gone through the last 6 steps to create this content that is a reflection of what you believe in, and for the people that really care. And you want to be able to promote it to as many people as possible. And you can join groups. You can you can do like a whole bunch of different boards on Pinterest, like join a whole different boards and promote your content. You can do it to your email list. You can ask your guests to do it to their email list, to make sure you publicize your stuff. Make sure that, like, there's a concept, you hear this a lot. You hear a lot of people, a lot of business owners say this on a regular basis, and it fucking annoys the shit out of me. Oh, I don't have to advertise. Everything that I do is word of mouth. That's a dumb fucking statement to make, because if you don't spend time in one of the core parts of business that is advertising and marketing, then you're doing something wrong. So I suggest that that you don't have to take it on as an 80% marketing and 20% content creation, but I think that spending enough time on marketing is important for every business owner. And if you're creating content that you're so passionate about, spend time publicizing it. And finally, I think this is the cherry on top, and you've got to make sure that that you do it. You've got to increase audience participation. Yes, it is a one-way street. It feels weird, the fact that you're talking to a screen, but okay, yeah, you're talking to a guest, and then you're putting that out there. But it's not for your guests; it's for the people that are listening to your show. So how do you get them to engage back with you? Create systems, create a call to action. Not for them to buy stuff. You don't have to create a podcast for them to buy stuff. And if you do or you don't, there's no right or wrong way. But you've got to increase them to talk back to you. Let them know that they can talk to you on Twitter, or send you an email, or join your Facebook group, or it's an open group, it's a free group, whatever it might be. Make sure that your people that are listening to your show can talk back to you, because they are the people that will tell you how to improve or not improve your show. Just the other day, someone told me that on Podcast Revolution, we missed editing one of the files, and the music was going for so long when it first started. And she was like, that's just rubbish, honestly. You got to fix that. And it's only because there is a feedback loop that we can improve as podcasters. So make sure that you increase audience participation, engage your audience, is key, and that that's the time that you think about, is when you finish the first 6 steps. You only start thinking about audience participation at that point. So don't rush and worry about that kind of stuff. First, I have a 45 item checklist that you got to do, and I feel that you should do it one at a time. It's a sequence, one after the other. It's at wearepodcast.com, but it's kind of very cool to be able to know that these are the steps that you should do one after the other, and that's what I use, and what I'd use for anyone that wants to do it. But thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on this Periscope. It's not as popular as it used to be. I've been away for a long time, but thanks, man. Thank you. I've been away for a long time. I used to get quite a lot of listeners on Periscope when we first started, but I think Periscope might be dying. But join us on Facebook. We've got a public group called We Are Podcast, and it's growing organically. It's great. It got really cool people in there. We've got Petra Jones in there. From the Mompreneur Show, and she's great, and she'll help with a whole bunch of things she's going through with her podcast. And if you have any questions as well, join us. Come in there. But thanks for joining me, and hopefully we'll catch you on the next Periscope when Michaela flips my arm and makes me do it again. But thanks, guys. Talk soon.